They don't want you to know this. A young African leader stands before the world, his words cutting through decades of lies. The narrative they've built about Africa is the greatest theft of our time. His voice trembles with controlled fury. The truth he's about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about the richest continent on Earth. For centuries, they've painted Africa as the broken continent, the charity case, the endless crisis. But what if I told you this was all by design? What if the poverty you see isn't natural, but manufactured? What if Africa's greatest enemy isn't drought, disease, or dictators, but the very system that claims to help it? The man speaking these words has become the voice of a generation that refuses to stay silent. And today, you're going to discover why his message is sending shockwaves through the halls of global power. The question isn't whether Africa is poor. The question is, who's been stealing its wealth? For over 60 years, the world has been fed the same story about Africa. You've seen the images. Children with distended bellies, endless deserts, conflict and chaos. These pictures flood your screens, your magazines, your consciousness until they become the only truth you know. But Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, has had enough of this manufactured narrative. When Traoré speaks about media distortion, he doesn't mince words. They show you our struggles, but never our solutions. They broadcast our problems, but silence our progress. This isn't just frustration talking. This is a calculated observation about how global media has weaponized storytelling against an entire continent. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a major news story celebrating African innovation? African wealth? African leadership that didn't come with a but or a however. The silence is deafening because it's intentional. The narrative of African poverty isn't just wrong. It's a carefully constructed lie designed to hide the greatest heist in human history. This systematic misrepresentation goes deeper than lazy journalism or unconscious bias. It's a tool of economic warfare. When the world believes Africa is broken, they don't question why Western corporations extract billions in resources while African children go hungry. They don't ask why the richest continent on Earth can't feed its own people. They accept the contradiction because the story they've been told makes it seem natural, inevitable, even charitable to exploit. The false narrative isn't just about perception. It's about justification. It gives moral cover to the continued extraction of African wealth by those who built their empires on African blood, sweat, and resources. But cracks are appearing in this carefully constructed lie. Leaders like Traoré are speaking truth to power, and their words are spreading like wildfire across a continent tired of being told it's poor while its gold, diamonds, and oil make others rich. Let me show you numbers that will make your blood boil. Africa sits on 30% of the world's mineral reserves. 30%. That's not a typo. We're talking about 90% of the world's platinum, 60% of the world's cobalt, the metal that powers every smartphone in your pocket, 40% of the world's gold, and oil reserves worth over $2 trillion. $2 trillion. With AT. But here's the kicker. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone has mineral wealth estimated at $24 trillion. $24 trillion. That's more than the GDP of the United States and China combined. Yet 77% of Congolese people live on less than $2 a day. How is this possible? How does the richest patch of Earth produce the poorest people? The answer is colonialism 2.0. The uniforms have changed, but the game remains the same. Instead of direct political control, they use contracts. Instead of governors, they use corporations. Instead of armies, they use debt and dependency. Take Glencore, the Swiss commodity giant. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, they extract cobalt that's essential for every electric car battery, every laptop, every smartphone. Their profit margins? Over 40% on some operations. The Congolese miners who risk their lives daily in those cobalt mines? They earn less than $2 a day. $2 for metal that powers a global industry worth hundreds of billions. Or consider France's relationship with its former colonies through the CFA franc system. 14 African countries are forced to store 50% of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. 50%. Imagine if Mexico had to store half its money in Washington, or if Canada had to keep half its wealth in London. It would be called economic colonialism. But when it happens to Africa, it's called monetary stability. Areva, the French nuclear giant, extracts uranium from Niger, uranium that powers 20% of France's electricity. Niger, meanwhile, remains one of the poorest countries on Earth. 90% of its population lives without electricity. They sit in darkness while their uranium lights up Paris. The uranium that powers French cities leaves Nigerian children studying by candlelight. The numbers get more obscene the deeper you dig. Total, the French oil company extracts billions of dollars worth of oil from African soil. Their annual profits from African operations exceed the entire GDP of most African nations they operate in. Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, they all follow the same playbook. Extract maximum value, leave minimum benefit. This isn't business. This is organized theft disguised as investment. When a multinational corporation signs a deal with an African government and walks away with 95% of the profits while local communities get 5%, that's not partnership. That's colonial extraction with a corporate logo. The infrastructure they build? It's designed for extraction, not development. Roads that lead from mines to ports, not from villages to markets. Railways that carry resources out, not goods in. Ports that ship wealth away, not opportunity home. They build the hardware of dependence and call it development aid. Here's a number that should terrify you: $88 billion. That's how much money flows out of Africa illegally every year. 88 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of most African countries. It's more than all the foreign aid Africa receives combined. While the world debates sending a few billion in aid to Africa, nearly 90 billion disappears into the shadows annually. This isn't petty corruption we're talking about. This is industrial-scale financial hemorrhaging orchestrated through a web of shell companies, tax havens, and offshore banking that would make a spy novelist jealous. The Panama Papers gave us a glimpse into this underworld. African leaders, multinational executives, and shadowy middlemen moving billions through places like the British Virgin Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Take the case of Isabel dos Santos, once dubbed Africa's richest woman. Portuguese and Angolan investigations revealed how she siphoned over $2 billion from Angola's oil wealth through a network of 400 shell companies. $2 billion that could have built schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Instead, it sits in offshore accounts while Angolan children die from preventable diseases. But here's where the conspiracy gets truly sinister. The same corporate interests draining Africa's wealth control the media that tells Africa's story. It's not coincidence. It's coordination. CNN is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, whose major shareholders include BlackRock and Vanguard, the same investment giants that hold massive stakes in mining companies operating across Africa. BBC receives funding from organizations with direct ties to British corporations extracting African resources. When these outlets consistently portray Africa as chaotic, primitive, and dependent, they're not just reporting news. They're protecting investments. Consider how the story gets told. When a European company signs a development deal with an African nation, it's called foreign investment and partnership. When an African leader negotiates the same deal, Western media focuses on corruption and mismanagement. The script is always the same. African leaders are incompetent. African people are helpless. Western intervention is necessary. The Guardian, owned by the Scott Trust with connections to British mining interests, consistently frames African resource extraction as either humanitarian necessity or African governmental failure, never as systematic Western exploitation. The New York Times, with board members connected to multinational corporations, does the same. They'll run a heartbreaking story about African poverty on Monday and ignore the corporate earnings reports showing record profits from African operations on Tuesday. This media complicity isn't accidental. It's strategic. NBC Universal, owned by Comcast, has shareholders who profit directly from African resource extraction. When their news division covers Africa, whose interests do you think they're protecting? When they show images of poverty and conflict, they're not advocating for change. They're justifying the status quo. The most insidious part? They use African suffering to raise money for charitable organizations that often funnel resources back to Western companies. They show you hungry children to collect donations, then use those donations to buy seeds from Western agricultural companies, medicines from Western pharmaceutical companies, and equipment from Western manufacturers. The charity becomes another extraction mechanism. Even the language is weaponized. African nations are developing permanently stuck in a state of becoming, never arriving. African leaders are strongmen or dictators, while Western leaders are democratically elected. African business deals are corrupt, while Western business deals are strategic partnerships. The vocabulary itself maintains the hierarchy. Look at a map of Africa today and count the foreign military bases. Go ahead, I'll wait. You'll find over 60 foreign military installations across the continent. 60. France alone operates 8 permanent military bases from Senegal to Djibouti. The United States has expanded from 1 base in 2002 to over 30 military installations across Africa today. China is building its first overseas military base in Djibouti, right next to the American and French facilities. But here's what they don't tell you. These bases aren't there for peacekeeping. They're there for resource protection. Every major military installation sits conveniently close to oil fields, mineral deposits, or strategic shipping routes. It's not coincidence. It's military economics. Take Niger, one of the world's poorest countries that happens to supply uranium to France's nuclear reactors. France maintains over 1,000 troops at bases in Niamey. Their official mission? Counterterrorism operations. The reality? Protecting uranium mines and the government that signs extraction contracts. When Niger's military government asked France to withdraw its troops in 2023, French officials called it illegitimate and refused to leave. Imagine if Niger had military bases in France and refused to leave when asked. The hypocrisy is stunning. Chad tells the same story. French troops have been stationed there for decades, ostensibly fighting terrorism. Yet Chad remains desperately poor while French companies extract billions in oil revenue. The French military isn't protecting Chadians. They're protecting French investments in Chadian soil. But France isn't alone in this game. The United States operates Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, officially for regional stability. The base costs American taxpayers $63 million annually and houses 4,000 personnel. What's really being protected? The shipping routes that carry African resources to global markets and the contracts that keep those resources flowing westward. Then there's the new player that's rewriting the rules, China. Beijing doesn't need military bases when debt works just as effectively. Sri Lanka learned this lesson the hard way when they couldn't repay Chinese loans for Hambantota port and had to hand it over to China for 99 years. Now China is applying the same playbook across Africa. Djibouti owes China over $1 billion, more than 77% of its entire GDP. Kenya borrowed billions for a railway from Mombasa to Nairobi. When payments become difficult, guess what China gets as collateral? Port access, infrastructure control, economic leverage that's more powerful than any military base. Zambia is drowning in Chinese debt. Over $6 billion owed to Chinese lenders, with copper mines as collateral. When Zambia struggles to pay, China doesn't send troops. They don't need to. They already own the mines. The debt trap is more elegant than colonial occupation because it makes African leaders complicit in their own subjugation. This is 21st century colonialism at its most sophisticated. Western powers maintain military presence to protect existing extraction operations. China uses debt to secure future extraction rights. Both approaches achieve the same goal, ensuring African resources flow outward while African people remain poor. The most chilling part? These foreign powers coordinate more than they compete. When African leaders try to break free from one system, they often find themselves trapped in another. Try to escape French military influence, and Chinese debt becomes suddenly attractive. Challenge Chinese loan terms, and Western security assistance appears as an alternative. It's a rigged game where every move benefits foreign interests. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just expose a conspiracy when he spoke those words. He lit a fire that's spreading across a continent. "We are not poor," he declared. "We are being made poor." And in that simple statement lies the key to everything. The recognition that poverty isn't Africa's natural state. It's a manufactured condition that can be unmade. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. What are you going to do with what you now know? You can't unknow these facts. You can't unsee these connections. You can't pretend that the exploitation of 1.4 billion people is just unfortunate circumstance. Because it's not. It's a choice, a system, a crime that continues because good people choose to look away. This isn't just about Africa. This is about the future of human civilization. When one continent can be systematically robbed for centuries while the world calls it charity, what does that say about our moral foundation? When media manipulation can hide theft this massive, what other lies are we being told? When military force can protect corporate profits while children starve, what kind of world are we accepting? The same system that keeps Africa poor keeps working people everywhere struggling. The same corporations extracting African wealth are the ones avoiding taxes in your country. The same media networks hiding African exploitation are the ones shaping your political opinions. The same banks moving African money offshore are the ones charging you fees for basic services. This isn't Africa's fight alone. This is humanity's fight. But imagine, just imagine, what Africa could become if these chains were broken. A continent with 30% of the world's mineral wealth, 60% of its uncultivated land, and the world's youngest population unleashed to build rather than be exploited. Imagine African universities leading global innovation. African cities setting the standard for sustainable development. African entrepreneurs creating solutions the world desperately needs. This isn't fantasy. This is possibility. Rwanda is already showing glimpses of this future, transforming from genocide to technological hub in just 30 years. Ethiopia is building Africa's largest hydroelectric dam. Ghana is developing its own space program. Nigeria's film industry is the world's second largest by volume. When African potential is unleashed, even partially, the results are extraordinary. The awakening Traoré speaks of isn't just political. It's spiritual. It's the recognition that every human being deserves dignity, opportunity, and the right to benefit from the wealth of their own land. It's the understanding that true security comes not from exploiting others, but from building a world where everyone can thrive. But this awakening needs you. It needs your voice, your attention, your refusal to accept the old lies. Every time you share this truth, you crack the foundation of the system that profits from ignorance. Every time you demand better reporting about Africa, you challenge media complicity. Every time you ask where your products come from and who profits from them, you threaten the invisibility that makes exploitation possible. The global powers banking on your silence are terrified of your awakening. They're counting on you to watch this video, feel momentarily outraged, and then return to business as usual. But you're not going to do that. You're going to be part of the solution. Share this video. Share this knowledge. Start conversations that make people uncomfortable. Ask the hard questions. Demand transparency. Support African businesses and leaders who are building a different future. Because when enough people know the truth, the lie becomes impossible to maintain. The choice is yours. You can be part of the system that keeps Africa exploited, or part of the movement that sets it free. But you can't claim ignorance anymore. You know too much. The question is, what will you do with what you know? The awakening has begun. The only question is whether you'll be part of it.